Welcome back to the Audacious Nimby. I'm Patrick Harders. I'm your host. Want to thank everybody so much for the great response we received, the kind words, the sharing, the reposting, and really just the impact that that first message had. And, I love our community. I love, all our neighbors. And it really means a lot to me that you're listening and that you share this interest. And we are forming an Audacious Nimby army. So, there's a lot going on in Prince William County. We have a number of things to talk about. We have an election coming up tomorrow. So Tuesday could be a really impactful election. I'm not going to talk about it too much right now. I'm a Bears fan and a Cubs fan. And one thing I've learned being fans of both of those clubs is we never talk about anything until everything is done. So we never count our chickens before they hatch. They've taught us that you never know how it's going to end. Fortunately, as of the last couple of weeks, the Bears have been pretty exciting to watch. If you saw them a couple nights ago, that was quite a game, and we were very excited to beat our nemesis, the Packers. But, I'm just excited about a lot of things going on. I think we're looking for a great spring. We have a lot of momentum right now. We have some big fights ahead of us, and we're gearing up for it. We are audacious in protecting our backyard. But part of this discussion is, why is it worth protecting? I truly believe that in order to protect your backyard, you need to love your community and love where you live. And there are these fights happening all over the country. There's some areas that I think are more significant than others, and some places where development should happen, and others, really where it shouldn't happen. We should never see a strip mall going in the DC mall, shopping center. We shouldn't see factories being built there because it's inappropriate. That's our community's gathering place. Around Gettysburg, I know there's some development they're fighting there, but the idea of putting an industrial wasteland all around Gettysburg would be a terrible use, or the Grand Canyon or Mount Rushmore. These are hallowed places in our country, places that we've had significant things happen. And so it's inappropriate from that point. But the other thing that's just as important is actually caring and loving your community and honoring your community and understanding why it's special. And I think for so long, so many in Prince William County haven't even respected themselves the way they should. A lot of our elected officials, really give us the feeling that Prince William County is, the redheaded stepchild to the other counties. We're not Fairfax. Fairfax is Tyson's Mall. They have development all over. We're not Loudoun County. We're just lucky that somebody's interested in us. And that's a completely inappropriate mindset if you're going to be somebody that's trying to protect the area. We have to understand the historical significance of Prince William County, the beauty of Prince William County, why it's special. And that must be first and foremost. We hear words like, Manassas and Hoodbridge, and all we get is bad development. And in fact, a lot of people you talk to have lost faith. They have one foot out the door. They're looking to move. They don't believe in their government. They don't believe that there's anybody standing up and representing them. And that's understandable for what's happened over the last 5 years. But that's not where I believe we're at. I believe we're at a turning point to truly define what Prince William County is going to become, what this entire area is going to look like, and there's great opportunities. But looking back at the historical significance, Prince William County has, it's a foundational county to our country. It was first established in 1731. And there's a lot that's happened in Prince William County, and precisely or exclusively what I'm looking at is Western Prince William County in the Gainesville district. And that's where I live. Obviously Gainesville and Brentsville are closely tied, and what happens here affects Brentsville. We're also very tied to Western Loudoun County, to Fauquier County, to Warren County. We are the last frontier before they're dealing with the invasion of housing sprawl and data center sprawl. So we are the front line, and we're the front line for the entire country, I believe. because this data center complex that they're looking at, there's nothing like it in America. And you hear about data centers all over. It's all over the news. But the digital gateway is different. It's different in its size and scope, its audacity that they've put out there. But it's not only the digital gateway, there's also the second one coming, South Dulles, whatever they want to name it now. Cosmos, I guess they're calling it. Maybe the largest data center, or at least the second. It's competing with the Prince County Digital Gateway, really adjacent to it. And then the housing sprawl that we're seeing and the contracts being offered all over the place by our ex-politicians and our current school board member. It's crazy. And if we don't have leaders and if the people don't understand how special this place is, we lose a lot. And I want to take a step back on this podcast and actually talk about the history of this area. And this area is special. So if you understand Virginia history, one of the foundational members of the colony was Lord Fairfax. Lord Fairfax was granted land that went from the Potomac River, which included Fairfax County, or became Fairfax County, Loudoun County, Prince William County, parts of Fauquier County, and actually went all the way down to Northern Neck. So a massive tract of land was granted to him. And he had his right wingman, the gatekeeper, who was actually titled by some King Carter or Robert Carter. Robert Carter was in charge of surveying the land and managing, selling, leasing, and really having care for that entire area of Virginia. And so as you saw the population come in, Robert Carter was really controlling a lot of that. And we also saw the governance start to come in. So the governance started to catch up with the population increase. So I mentioned Prince William County, which a lot of people think as, a secondary county to Fairfax and Loudoun. But Prince William County was actually established in 1731. Carved out of that was formed Fairfax County, and then Loudoun County, and then Fauquier County, all between 1731 and 1760 or so. But Prince William County was first. So we were the first one established. And I think that's significant to a degree. We're not a secondary county. We were the first ones here. We were the first place that they put the county. And there's a number of reasons for that. One reason was that Robert Carter, when he was looking at land for his family, he actually had the entire area to look at and survey. And the place that he had his son land in, and he had another son, they built their manors right here, not just in Prince William County, but right here in our Gainesville district. There was two manors. There's Pennsylvania Manor that's now currently sitting on the Manassas battlefield. And then just a couple miles up, maybe a mile and a half up or so, was Sudley Manor. So if you're ever driving down Sudley Road and you hit Sudley Manor Drive, they're named after this manor. So when Robert Carter had his choice of anywhere in this whole Virginia swath of land to choose from, he chose this area. And a number of reasons that was chosen: the rivers, the beauty of the area, how fertile the land was. But this is where they chose to really develop in the first place, or to build their homestead. And they built a town called Sudley Springs, which Sudley Springs is just north of of Manassas Battlefield. I live on Sudley Springs. Sudley Springs, back in the day, they had a church. They created the Sudley Methodist Church. They had the mill, which any bigger area, mill was a big industry. They had a wheelhouse. They had a number of an ironsmith. They also had a hotel. So in the early 1800s, the Sudley Hotel actually sat right up on top of the hill where I live, because my family restored the old Miller house. So the house that the family that would manage the mill would live in this house. And so when I saw this property come available, I purchased the property, found out it was the Miller house, and I said, this is part of history. We need to preserve it. So we actually put a lot of time into restoring the old Miller house. But I find all of that interesting, and it ties more to history because Landon Carter actually sold off the mill around 1830, and we all know what happened in this area in the 1860s. 1861, we had the first battle of the Civil War. Now, this is a topic that brings up a lot of controversy. In fact, I've heard supervisors say that it embarrasses them, that they'd like to see the whole thing bulldozed, that it's a blemish on our county to have the Manassas battlefield, yet thousands upon thousands of people come and visit it every year. And there's a reason for that. It had historical significance. My personal feeling is the worst thing that our country ever did was slavery. And there are a number of founding forefathers that tried to put in poison pills, and John Adams and others spoke against slavery, trying to bring it to an end. We never had a William Wilberforce in our country that was fighting successfully to end slavery, but slavery ended right after the Civil War. So, it was a transformational time in our country. States fighting each other, the federal government fighting the Confederate states. A lot happened. We had more people die in the Civil War, more Americans die than really any other war, maybe up till World War II. I'd have to check that. But a historical transformation of our entire country. The end of slavery happened then, and we began to right the worst wrong we ever had in our country. And what I always find fascinating is the first battle happened right here. So right where the digital gateway is planned to go up, there is the Manassas battlefield. About a year after that was the second Battle of Manassas, which, from a military standpoint is a fascinating story to read about and how that battle took place. But two massive historical events happened. And in fact, if you ever go to Henry Hill, there is a lady named Judith Carter Mill, and that was the daughter of Landon Carter, who she was the first civilian that was killed in the Civil War. She was at her home bedridden, and a cannonball went off. So that family still had great connections to this area, and there's many families that have been in this area for a long time. One of the other things that I can't say how important this is to our country's foundation and who we are as people was a story that took place right in this area, and that's the story of Ginny Dean. I've talked to county officials. I'm like, we need to get something done to tell this story because Ginny Dean was born into slavery. And prior to the Civil War, there were some freed slave communities and free men communities, and there was also slave communities. Ginny Dean was born into slavery. 1865, after the Civil War, she was given her freedom. And she was a young girl. She ended up going to Ohio to get an education. She came out of that and was in Ohio and came back to her community. Because what had happened after the Civil Wars, there were freed slave communities, free men communities that started to establish right on Pageland Road, right on Thoroughfare Lane. And they started to build churches, to build businesses. And she came back to her community, set up a school, a vocational school to train people in her community on different trades out there, shoemaking to, mechanical, whatever industry that they had at the time as an industrial school. She was training, making clothes, a number of other things. Quickly outgrew the facility in Featherbed and ended up moving down to Manassas by the railroad tracks, where you could still see the old Ginny Dean School. There's a park named after her. But I find it such an inspiring story, a story of who we are as Americans, that no matter the situation, no matter the obstacles, what we always have is hope. What we always have is something to inspire, and then to take that and to give back to others. And so that's a story that I talked about a number of years ago in front of the dais, is saying this should really be the second part of the story after the Manassas battlefield. There should be some recognition of this historical person in our country that did an amazing thing, came out of the worst situation, and really spent a lifetime establishing churches in our community and educating and training people up in a vocation. So I'm hoping Prince William County does that and doesn't take her family burial plot and simply build the data center on top of it, which is what they're currently planning. But that it's an inspiring story. There's also a great story that Sudley Methodist Church reenacts every single year. And it was a Union soldier that in the 1880s, 1890s, came back to the community. He wanted to find some soldier, a Confederate soldier that had helped him out during the Civil War. He was left for dead outside of the church, and a gentleman who lived on Featherbed, who was fighting in the battle, brought him into the church and actually took care of him. First couple days, he just fed him and took care of him, and then brought him in and got him all taken care of. And they ended up fighting in battles against each other for a number of years. But 35 years later, he came back to see if he could find the community known as Sudley Springs and what had happened there, and maybe even find the gentleman who had helped him. He ended up finding him and asked, "I'd like to pay you back by helping you really get your community built up a little bit, maybe help you rebuild your home," because Sudley Springs was devastated by the war. And the gentleman living on Featherbed said, "I don't need your help, but the church still needs to be rebuilt." And so the Union ex-soldier went back home to Boston, put ads in the newspaper, raised money, and actually helped to fund to rebuild the Sudley Methodist Church. And every year, the Union soldiers and Confederate soldiers would get together and have a dinner. And they still honor that today. It was a time of reconciliation for our country after the horrific things that had happened during the Civil War. And that's the Sudley Methodist Church right here. So those are historical, significant things that have happened right here that we're instead of celebrating or telling the story or learning from history, we're building on top of. Because if you look at where these data centers are planned, the Digital Gateway is planned to go between a state park and a national park. So it's a crazy placement to put it. The other historical thing that I find significant outside of normal things, but one thing that changed Prince William County forever was the Occoquan Reservoir. So in the 1950s, this area, the community, Fairfax, started looking for a source of water for development so they could have a drinking water source. And the plans came up to build the Occoquan Reservoir. And the way that they would feed that reservoir is through watersheds. So Fairfax County took western Fairfax. So you drive through Clifton, you notice that there are bigger lots, all 5-acre lots, and that's for their watershed. A lot of the watershed falls on Prince William's side. So in fact, 43% of our county is considered a watershed. So that's what's feeding the Occoquan Reservoir. So we had already built up a lot close to the Occoquan Reservoir, but what was still open was the western area, so the Brentsville district and the Gainesville district. So this is an important, significant event that happened in Prince William County because it's what shaped our growth. The idea was we wouldn't develop too much in this area. And in fact, many community leaders throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s were defending this area from growth, and it's a smart growth tactic. In the late 90s, they finally put in the Rural Crescent. The Rural Crescent put a permanent ban on development in this area. So it'd be open space, 10-acre lots, allow the tree cover, the grass, everything to filter the water into the streams. So we didn't have water management. Instead, we could have proper water management that could feed the Occoquan Reservoir to give drinking water to over 1 million people. But Ann Wheeler in the 2020s really tried to gut the Rural Crescent as much as possible. So, where we stand now, we stand with the Occoquan Reservoir drinking water to about 1 million people is the most endangered or heavily populated drinking water in America. We have the Manassas Battlefield, a beloved national park that talks about the history of our country. That is considered by the National Park Service as the most endangered national park in America. And that's because we are looking at our county approving the Prince William County Digital Gateway, which comes to the equivalent of 148 super Walmarts, all being built on Pageland Lane. So a crescent around the battlefield and really coming right adjacent to it and close to it. And keep in mind, the battles didn't just take place on Manassas Battlefield. It took place throughout this whole area. There's grave sites. I know on my own property, we find bullets and we find old Civil War relics. I'm not much of a metal detector because I get bored pretty easily. My ADHD kicks in. But there are a lot of events that happen in this area. So we have some dangerous things to look at, and we have some irresponsible things to look at. Replace the watershed, which is at getting closer to a high salinity count, would cost us, untold amounts of money. It costs us maybe billions of dollars to try and come up with a new watershed. So the prescription was we keep the rural crescent, we keep the rural areas, and we are doing the exact opposite right now. We've just approved housing, more and more housing on Vint Hill, which was irresponsible. Yes, we need housing, but there's responsible ways to do it. Redevelopment, reinvestment is the key, not continued sprawl. Continued sprawl gets us exactly what we don't want. The data centers are still pushing through. So we have the 2 largest data centers that they want to build on top of the watershed without doing a water study, without checking the aquifers, without doing anything that would be a responsible thing to do, building them in an inappropriate historical area. And now we actually have more they're planning to build. They want to build the 2nd largest data centers, and we have the politicians building out the housing. So I say all of this to say now is the time that we need to stand firm, that we need to say as citizens of Prince William County, we shouldn't be excited just because a developer is interested in us. My son and daughter, one thing I teach them, and I say over and over again, is how valuable they are, how precious they are to me, how valuable they are, how important they are, because I link land usage and land decisions similar to marriage. Once you make a decision to build a housing project, that doesn't go away. That's going to be there for a long, long time. Once you make a decision to build a data center, that's going to be there. Even when the technology goes out in 20, 30 years, however long we're going to get out of it, those buildings, those structures, those are there. You look at the Rust Belt in many places in our country where some industry left, and there's those buildings just sit there dilapidated. They're very expensive to clear out and rebuild and reinvest and everything like that. So these decisions are important. And just like I tell my children, you need to understand the value you have. Prince William County is a beautiful spot. Prince William County has value. It's important. It's important historically. It's really the last place where development stops up until the rural crescent that protects Warren County and Fauquier County and Western Loudoun County. We are the battle line. There is a point that smart growth will put a definitive line on development. If you don't put that in, it's all over. You're not going to get that back. And then you're just going to continue sprawl, and you'll look like Atlanta or Charlotte or other cities that are trying to fight sprawl. We need to have smart growth. And it's a really simple thing. I sometimes bang my head against the wall because I'm like, this makes all the sense in the world. We have enough data centers. We have twice as many approved data centers than the county recommended at the highest level. But we're continuing to push this further because there are greedy developers that want to, see how much they can get away with. The housing that they're looking at, these housing units, are not what people want. That's why people show up in droves. They don't want the sprawl into the rural areas. What they want to see happen is what we've seen in Western Montgomery, what we've seen in Western Loudoun, where there is a focus on the agro areas, the farming areas, their wineries, open land, open space, places that people can go to and destinations. We need diversity in that, and we need to focus development where it needs to be focused. So my whole point of this message is don't forget who you are, Prince William. Remind your supervisors that we're a special place. We're not the place that's just going to have bad development. We don't have to accept it. They are put in power to represent us, not the developers. The developers don't really get to vote for them. They just fund them, but they don't get to vote for them. So remind them, we can vote. We have the power, and they need to listen to the citizens, and they need to understand how much we care about this area. So I truly appreciate each of you. I know how important this is, and near and dear, and other communities around the country, other people around the country listened to my last podcast and commented on it. And I understand every community is important and we need to value who we are. And we need to let our elected leaders understand that we care about our backyards, not because we're whatever they mean by NIMBY, but because we actually care about our communities. So thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you share this message, get it out, let people hear us. There is an election tomorrow. I'm going to give you updates this week on that and how that's going to impact the next couple months. Thank you so much.